My name is Dmitri Beliakov, and yes, indeed, I am Russian here in the US, and this is quite a controversial given the current circumstances. But what happened basically, I covered the conflict in the Donbass area for 5.5 years, from 2014 down to November of 2019. And I was in Armenia February of 2022 when Putin invaded the Ukraine, and I realized that I'm not going back. I worked in Armenia on a sponsored project, and same time I was pulling all sorts of strings, looking for opportunity to get my family evacuated, because both Nelly, my wife, and myself, we decided that we would want to give our children a better chance. I remember that 7th of March, my wife sent me a text saying very, very clearly that if we can't make it, we have to do anything possible and impossible to give our children better opportunities. So thanks to Andrei Sakharov Foundation, I have managed to obtain US visas for entire family, and thanks to Lisa Chelidze, who was one of the functioning members of board at that time of Sakharov Foundation, and who worked for Norwich University, I have managed to get an invitation to present as research fellow at Norwich University, and this is where I am at the moment. It's a fellowship. It will expire at some point, but anyway, there was like a very convenient win-win situation when everyone is a winner. So my family is here with me, 3 children, my wife, and a dog. And why am I here? First of all, I would like to start with a question to the audience. How do you generally understand the goals and missions of journalism? What do journalists actually do? In what way do you see journalists, us, contributing to peace? Please, be brave. Yeah.
Well, I think you go into a situation for various reasons of your own, and you immerse yourself in it. And from that immersion comes what you would like to share, you know, with
maybe a large group or a small group of some of people. And so it comes from you, what moves you, what you feel needs to be said in the way that you need to say it, you know, whatever way that is.
Well, unfortunately, you did not answer the question.
Oh, I didn't?
No, you didn't, because my point is, what's the advantage of the audience? How does the audience benefits from us?
Oh, the audience?
From us, from the journalists.
From journalists. The audience that reads the papers or sees the photos, is that what?
Exactly, yeah.
How do we benefit?
How do you benefit?
We assume you are telling us some truths or some
Better, yes.
some objective perspective on what is happening somewhere.
What's the main goal of journalism and photojournalism in particular? What's the main goal?
to bear witness, to educate.
Even better?
To give an unbiased view of whatever situation you're involved in.
Okay, I will help you. I believe, and I know it from my own experience, that the main goal of journalism, and in particular of photojournalism, is to increase the awareness of the audience. This is our service. We are providing a very important service, which is called the awareness. Because we don't want to be in a situation when the audience, when people like you say, oh, we haven't been told. We never knew it happened. Like, we didn't know about, you know, things were happening in Chechnya and in Ukraine and in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Vietnam, you know. Conflicts come and go. But people who suffer, they stay, you know. So what has been happening in Ukraine since 2014 and what is going on right now is another example. The free-spirited Ukrainians, who are seen as the enemies of Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia, are subjected to ethno-historic cleansing. The Russian aggressors are terrorizing the Ukrainian population on the occupied territories, where tortures and extra-legal executions are widespread, and where from dozens of thousands of people, including underage children, have been evacuated by force and taken to the aggressor country against their will. Those regions of Ukraine that continue to resist are turned into scorched earth by indiscriminate bombardment, missile strikes. Therefore, we need people like myself on the ground with a view to provide you with one crucial service, the awareness. 16 months passed since Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and there is little doubt that this war was pre-planned, and Putin has money for years of military confrontation. There should be no illusions. As long as Putin is staying in power in the Kremlin, the war will not end. It will drag on and expand. The size of the Russian army is rapidly increasing, the defense industry is being reoriented, and education is becoming an instrument of propaganda and military training. And this was one of the reasons why my wife and myself, we decided we don't want our children to care about this or to be subjected by the propaganda. So Russia is being prepared for a long and really exhausting and expensive war. For Putin, it is one forever war. I'm trying just to explain to you their mentality. After all, Putin thinks of his period of rule as a permanent war. He and the people around him in the Kremlin, they seriously think that they have long been involved in some war, in some other war. And it's just now that this war in the Ukraine is entering an aggressive phase. It is obviously impossible for Putin to win this war, but achievable goals after which the war could end are simply not there. The real goal is simply to keep Vladimir Putin in power. That's the only mission. I was asked a couple of months ago in another interview with one photography online resource, it's called Feature something, about the relationship between the war in Donbass and the invasion in 2022. How are these two events connected? And I had to explain over and over again that there are actually no two events. There's just one, only one. Because for every Ukrainian, the war started not February 24 of 2022, but February 27 of 2014. That's when the Russian so-called polite people in green uniform without any insignia, landed in Simferopol airport and overtaken the Ukrainian army bases and took over the Crimea, and annexation has become a fact. So it's 9 years, not 16 months. And unfortunately, so far, few people in the West realize it. Putin's invasion of Ukraine was so shocking in its scale of senseless brutality that it automatically triggers associations with World War II, with its mass killings and destruction, but we still need to understand how we actually arrived to this. What were the mistakes and how it all became possible? We must study what was happening from 2014 down to 2022, because it is said that one must consult the past to learn about the future. So I think we're going to start with a slideshow, and I'll be showing pictures from my photography archive, and I will briefly comment on them. So we need yet to understand how everything that happened in February, March of 2014 in the Crimea was a prelude to the war for Donbass. Right here, this is just the very, very beginning, innocent beginning of so-called Krymskaya Vesna, Crimean Spring. This is a pro-Ukrainian demonstration of protest where students, they protest the Russian invaders. And some of these young girls, I wonder where they are now, are holding these posters in their hands saying, Crimea is not Russia. This is a pro-Russian demonstration where mad-looking priest with some crazy posters. It's even difficult to translate what does it say there. It's a mix of kind of anti-Western and anti-Ukrainian stereotypes. And he encourages the Russian aggression. These are pro-Russian missionaries, and they're smashing Ukrainian cars, and they're dancing on them, and they're waving the Russian flag. This is Simferopol, right? Really the first week of invasion. This is a pro-Ukrainian one. The posters say, I do not want to live in Russia. Bring back Black Sea to Ukraine. The girl with a yellow and blue scarf poster in her hand says, it aches. It's painful. Aches. Here, two antipodes, a pro-Russian one and pro-Ukrainian one, confront each other. And you can see there's an exhausted Ukrainian policeman behind him. These are Russian radicals who have taken shields from Ukrainian riot police, and they painted these shields with colors of Russian national flag. This is a staged demonstration of support of the idea that Crimea would be integrated very soon. It's all staged. This is close to the ending. Ukrainians kind of given up, and they were facing the reality that Crimea is no longer Ukrainian soil. These are Russian Cossacks drinking in a pub. More Cossacks on a central square where the statue of Lenin can be seen. These are the people who made it. I was incredibly lucky as a journalist to witness one of the crucial events of the entire scene, how this is the first appearance of private military company Wagner. These are them. These are the Wagner guys, people of Prigozhin. They took over the Ukrainian airfield in Belbek, and we arrived like 15 minutes before the storm started. And later, I remember it very well so far, they started to confiscate flashcards and films from the journalists. So I was lucky one to hide my SIM card, to hide my flashcard into my socks, basically. This is a very unfortunate family of Crimean Tatars. Historically, the entire Crimea was inhabited by the Tatars. And they were oppressed by Stalin, then they were oppressed by Russians. And this is a very, very lovely family who managed to kind of preserve a tiny private museum of Tatar culture. This is the central square of Donetsk, which is the capital of Donetsk People Republic, one of the self-proclaimed autonomies, which was subdivided from the Ukraine in the very first months of the Russian Spring. And you can see a portrait of Stalin. And the building behind is a Donbass Opera House. This is one of the, that's 2014, no, that's 2015, and this is Saur Mohila. It used to be one of the sacred shrines of the Ukraine after World War II, because at World War II there was one of the kind of heaviest battles against Nazis, and they erected massive World War II monument there. And because it was standing on a so-called commanding height, and it had to be taken over, and all summer of 2014 there was a massive battle for control over this height, and the monument was destroyed. And what happened later, that all sorts of propaganda brainwashed people arrive to this place just to do selfie and to express their excitement over this fact. So it was kind of the dancing on the grave, basically. And another very much Soviet-style meeting, all staged. This is one of the first meetings in Donetsk. This is still May of 2014, when the guy named Tsaryov, he was just a loser and an alcoholic, and he was fished out by the Kremlin just to serve as a convenient fool. And the goons with guns around him, they serve as an entourage, you know, like an aggressive entourage. They pretend to be like serious, mean bodyguards. So he was talking some blah, blah, blah bullshit about Novorossiya future and things like that. These are the rebels checkpoint. More rebels. Those guys belong to Vostok Brigade, one of the most professional and most well-armed brigade, headed by Alexander Hodakovsky, who I knew very well at that time, who was an ex-SBU, which was a Ukrainian analog of the FSB, who switched sides and who started fighting against the Ukraine. I joined them on their raid, and we were ambushed by Ukrainians, barely survived. So Hodakovsky can be seen in the background with a machine gun. We're surviving the ambush. We're escaping on a highway back to Russia. This is the aftermath of a railroad airstrike. I think it was an airstrike, maybe it was booby trap and blown up. So basically rebels were trying to block all the main driveways heading to Donetsk. This is the aftermath of artillery strike. A Ukrainian convoy was ambushed, and I was the first to document the aftermath. Here is another airstrike. An airstrike in the center of Donetsk. Ukrainian troopers escaping from Mariupol, that's 2014. There was an expectation that it will come under attack, but then Russians decided not yet, for whatever reason. Rebels on the checkpoint. Look at their faces. Working class men, yeah? Just normal people, trolley bus drivers, miners, you know, that kind of people. They were engulfed with the idea of a happy future, bright future with Russia. They believed that their salaries would become higher, that Putin will come and help them to fight with corruption, you know, very, very naive. Look at this guy. Look into his eyes. Maybe you can read something in his face. Look at his ridiculous weapon. Yeah. An aftermath of industry destruction. In the trenches with rebels. I have been lucky to photograph work of Buk, which is a cruise missile that has been used to shoot down MH17, the infamous one Boeing, where almost 300 Westerners were killed. We will need to be honest with ourselves while looking into the eyes of the relatives of victims of Malaysian air flight MH17 disaster that killed 298 people in the airspace above Ukraine. MH17 was a turning point. It made it impossible to ignore the events in Ukraine. Yet, NATO would not interfere in the conflict because that was 2014, and if you remember the history at that time, United States and its allies were up to their ears with all sorts of things in Afghanistan and Iraq. That was when ISIS just emerged. So there was no time for the Ukraine. And this is exactly how, 8.5 years later, we arrived at February 24, 2022. I arrived to this cornfield where Malaysia airline Boeing was shot down, and I witnessed the aftermath. These are remains of people being picked up. It was absolutely horrible. That was one of the most challenging assignments in my life. I was on assignment for Stern, which is German periodical, weekly magazine. And it was basically close to impossible to photograph, because what we saw, fragments of people scattered all around the place, mixed with kind of bits of fuselage and pieces of the airplane. And, wrecked luggage. And I could see how rebels like this guy were going through luggage, just looting it basically, chasing interesting watch or, money. None of Putin's original goals, the lightning seizure of much of Ukraine, the overthrow of Zelensky government, and the establishment of puppet power have been achieved. For the first 2 months, all the crushing power of the Russian army was split by a handful of weary and somewhat armed Ukrainian fighters. They fought with a stubborn belief that history favors them, because they carried in the depths of their souls the freedom that must surely give birth to victory, the goal of every war. The Russians carried only their lonesome blindness. Judging by the results of the first year of battle, the Russian side suffered between 100 to 200,000 dead and wounded, lost half of its tanks, and almost emptied its stockpiles of ammunition. Cut off from the Western world, Russia has lost its largest natural oil and gas markets. The best part of the Russian elite is in exile. The war is also a failure of all Russian diplomacy and foreign policy, because aid to the Donbass has turned into not so much aid to the inhabitants of the Donbass, but rather into a process of sacrifice of the residents of the region. Also, as a result of the war launched by Russia, civilians are killed by hundreds across all regions of Ukraine. However, Putin still does not believe that he has lost the war. On the contrary, he continues to lead it and prepares a big new offensive to take full control of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Official Russia is lying openly, denying civilian casualties as a result of its action, and unconvincingly calling war crimes committed by the Russian military in Bucha or Mariupol as staged Ukrainian and Western dramatization. The crimes committed by Russia in the Ukraine and the Kremlin propaganda efforts, which remind us of Nazi propaganda chief Dr. Goebbels, are calling for re-education of the lost lessons of World War II to the international audience once again. For years, Russian propaganda kept rattling on claims that NATO was encircling Russia and that Ukraine posed a threat to Russia. However, Putin is certainly aware of the fact that Russia is 30 times the size of Ukraine, and that it has land borders with 14 countries, of which only 5 are members of NATO. So Putin knows there is no encirclement and no threat. In fact, Putin basically denies the Ukraine as a sovereign country. He believes that Russia has a privilege to dictate to its neighbor, and the invasion of Ukraine is a form of rough warning, the punishment of the Ukraine for disloyalty. Right now, Russian soldiers fighting on the front are having it drummed into their heads the idea that if you screw up this war, there will be no such country as Russian Federation. Russia will no longer exist. Therefore, this is not war anymore. This is one huge punitive expedition, wide-scale punishment, through the course of which Russia is now prepared to wipe out Ukraine. So no one can have it if Russia cannot. The Western countries do not seem to have realized the extent of Vladimir Putin's existential threat to the world. In 2016, Putin held a mini geography exam for the children of Russia, for the gifted children. And during that exam, of course staged, the president asked a 9-year-old schoolboy a question: where the borders of Russia end? And the boy started. The borders of Russia end through the Bering Strait with the USA, and Putin interrupted him and answered himself, Russia's borders do not end anywhere. Does it all mean that Putin will not stop in Ukraine? I think that his goal is not only the conquest of Ukraine, but also the total defeat of the entire Western system, which he hates so much. Along with the Western way of life, with all our freedoms, openness and democracy. Yes, imperfect, but therefore no least precious and priceless. And we cannot afford to lose, because no one wants to live in peace under the laws of Charles Darwin, where the strong takes whatever they want and the weak have only to submit or die out. We must firmly declare and firmly decide that we must win. The victory of all the Europe in a war that we did not choose depends on Ukraine's victory. The West should stop signaling its indecisiveness and frugality to Putin, and instead declare once and for all resolutely, stop the war and start negotiations. Otherwise, your army will be destroyed in Ukraine by all possible means. Let's continue with the slideshow. So this is 2015. I've been given access to the Ukrainian army site. I'm one of the very, very few Russian journalists who had been given access on both sides. So it was easy to operate on the separatist side for obvious reasons. And I was using a convenience of being accredited with, let's say, an introduction letter from Der Spiegel or Wall Street Journal or the Sunday Times. So in 2015, 2016, 2017, that was relatively easy. But of course, everything is not, it doesn't stay forever. So at some point, the Ukrainians stopped getting me accredited. But I will tell you, that's a different story. So this is Mariupol area, a place called Shirokina. And the burning village is the outskirts of Shirokina. And I'm photographing from the Ukrainian army site. I was with the infamous Donbass battalion, which took heavy casualties 1 year before that, in 2014, when they lost in Ilovaisk. It's a hand-to-hand fight, basically. The separatists were probably 30 to 50 meters from us all day long. I still remember the name of this woman, Tatiana Yefremova. In one day, she lost a husband, a house, her business, in result of a missile strike from the separatist side. And that was January of 2015. Here is one of the most colorful and quite charismatic leaders of the separatists, one of the Cossacks, who said a lot of crazy things in his interview to Al Jazeera, who I covered it for. Positions of rebels. This is a photograph from the Ukrainian side. There was quite a remarkable night. Barely survived. Ukrainians, battalion number 46. Ruins of Uglegorsk. Rebels attacking. Ukrainian sniper. Ukrainians again. Just getting ready to go for a fight. That's winter of 2017. I spent a New Year and Christmas with Ukrainians. This is about 6 months before that, summer of 2016. This is a ruin of Shirokina Sanatorium. Used to be a very fine resort. Has been completely devastated. This is one of the most memorable pictures. What happened was that there was so-called День незалежности, the Independence Day, which is the main national holiday in the Ukraine. And typically what happened every year, that both sides would start sending congratulations to each other, beginning from a sniping fire, then the caliber would increase. And so it started with a sniping fire, and then hand grenades, and then grenade launchers, and then mortars. Mortars came. And at some point, one of the Ukrainian fighters was incredibly lucky, accidentally, just shooting almost blind. He has hit an armed depot on the separatist side, and it resulted like huge volcano. And I was there, and I have managed to photograph the explosion itself, and we were like excited. And for about 45 minutes, everything was just burning hell and exploding on their side. But then the wind started blowing towards us, and we were separated by a booby-trapped potato field. And these landmines began to explode. And little by little, we realized that our position is burning too. So we were running around the place like headless chicken with buckets and canisters of water in hands. And I was one of them, and we were trying to extinguish fire. So we can see the guy in the center with a bucket of water. I was so naive. And in the end, we had to jump into a potato cellar of a local woman, and we sat there for all night because separatists started pounding Ukrainian positions from 120 millimeter mortars, and that was like seriously big baby. So we decided not to take our chances. In the morning when we came to the surface, man, I just couldn't recognize the environment. It's just scorched earth. Yeah, Ukrainian soldier in a fight. I remember the name of this boy, Artyom Bычkov, and that's a village of Novoyekaterinovka. And he poses in front of a destroyed Ukrainian truck which carried the ammunition and came under attack by a mortar or some artillery attack. These are remains of a cluster munition, Russian cluster munition, Uragan. That's the type of the caliber. And this is the residential area in Debaltsevo. And this is February of 2015. Debaltsevo was a very important industrial node, railway node, industrial node. All sorts of facilities were there. So there was a serious fight for it. For 2.5 months, Ukrainians lost. This is Debaltsevo as well. Civilians surviving. Oops. Okay, I'm having trouble. Trying to relaunch. Sorry, it's not my fault. That's weird. Let's try. We have to go back through this again. Sorry. Well, enjoy. Yeah, I think. What's that? That's very weird. Okay, this is Donetsk, and this is the aftermath of a mortar attack. And this poor woman was killed, just a straight shot in the head by a mortar, piece of mortar. This is the funeral of a Ukrainian guy who arrived to Donetsk from Ukraine to fight on the separatist side. And so his family, his father, who as far as I remember was diagnosed with some weird oncology, his mother, his sister, and another relative, they arrived to basically bury him. So it was quite high risky for them because they were, burying the guy who technically was a traitor in their home country. And the entire Ukraine was kind of divided in half at that time. And I talked to them, and I could see how uneven they were regarding to what their relative did. Father was supporting him, mother was against, sister said, I don't understand how he basically could do anything like this. It was totally mad. He was always like a normal Ukrainian, and why would he go to Donetsk and engage himself in a fight? So it was still a bit of a mystery for myself how people were brainwashed with such a tremendous speed and what actually happened. But a lot of people believed in a number of stereotyped cliches like that NATO is looming, that American army is almost there, that some Abrams tanks are somewhere in that forest and they're ready to attack. And they insisted that this is all true. And I talked to one guy who told me that our mission is to die where we are because we want to be the last barrier when NATO arrives. They really saw their mission like this. And it was in vain. The story of this guy is like an incredible story. I really believe that mission of a good journalist is not to focus on high-profile people like all these presidents and generals and high-ranking warlords. We need to show how it is for regular, average person. So this guy, his first name is Sergei, and he worked at the local steel smelter, right? Heavy work, very much poisonous air, bad ecology, not a lot of money, like $300 a month probably. And the irony was that because there was war, his home was in Donetsk, but his work on Ukraine-controlled territory. So every week he would have to cross the border between the Ukrainian-controlled and the separatist-controlled areas. And it was so painstaking because for Ukrainians, For Ukrainians, he was a separatist. And for the separatists, on some different checkpoint, he was a fascist. So I documented his route. I basically traveled. I spent some time with him in Artyomovsk. That's where his steel smelter was. Oh, sorry, Avdiivka. That's where the steel smelter was. I spent some time there. And I photographed what does he have on the table when he eats, where does he sleep, what are his living conditions, right? Because this is important. And then I traveled with him to Donetsk. And he posed me later on a cemetery where his mom and dad were buried. Because to pay a visit to the graves of his parents, he would have to make an enormous journey. Before the war, it would take like 20-25 minutes on a bicycle. And after the war, once the war started, it would take up to 11 hours. These are brainwashed children posing with portraits of World War II heroes taking part in a so-called patriotic propaganda action. Because one of the kind of propaganda agendas declared over and over again is that this is war for liberation of Ukraine and the Donbass against Nazis. So they insisted that Ukrainian government is a government of Nazis and they're fighting against Nazis. And so they were making a clear parallel between that holy struggle against Nazis in World War II time and the current war. Cossacks pray before going frontline. There were a lot of nameless graves like this, because sometimes it would be impossible to identify character, nothing to identify really, and so they would just put the numbers. So if you look at the digits, you will understand. That's how many. And this is a cemetery in the outskirts of Donetsk. And here is another grave of Ukrainian soldiers drinking vodka once they pulled out from Russian encirclement. And I've been together with them. And they were like freaking out. Man, they were freaking out. The aftermath of a battle, all this scattered munition. Wagner guys in Debaltsevo. Same. This is school on the occupied territory. Nice. This is one of the bomb shelters. That's how people survived. This is a hospice, which was a mix of a hospice, a psychiatric asylum, and an elderly house. So they had no facilities. So they had to send and pack everyone there. And the guy in the center is one of the rebel soldiers who lost his legs in result of a mortar attack. And he was there as well, and no one cared. This used to be the airport, international airport of Donetsk. And this used to be a mill house. This is the aftermath of a battle. Fight. After the battle. Positions of rebels, positions of the Ukrainians, it's all mixed. This is the entrance to Debaltsevo. Actually, this is the map of Donetsk area. This is the map. After Ukrainians pulled out from Debaltsevo, they have abandoned quite a few of their bodies, of their comrades' bodies. There was no way to evacuate everyone, and this woman, a local woman, all she could do is just at least to cover them, Mr. Paulin. This is in famous hospital number 21, hospital in Donetsk, and this used to be a surgery room. This is a Ukrainian soldier who broke out from encirclement in Debaltseve. About 5 years later, his relatives found me. I just received an email from, I think she was his wife, probably a widow, and she was begging me to help her to find her husband. And I told her that, look, I don't even know what was his name because I only met him for less than half a minute. I only had half a minute to fix a picture. So all I could do is just send her these pictures. War medic from the Ukrainian battalion. Ukrainian sniper. Statue of Lenin served as a kind of a target. Ukrainian positions. Ukrainians had fun painting hand grenades in the national colors. We're waiting for the end of the mortar bombardment. These are Ukrainian positions. This is how the war is, really. I mean, you don't fight often in a full disguise. Sometimes you have to fight just in your underwear because it's hot. Steaming hot. Ukrainian positions. I have been lucky. That's November 2019. This picture of Zelensky I took on my last journey to Donbass. I was incredibly lucky to have been given access. Despite I write from the separatist side, somehow negotiated. Talking to his bodyguards and all that. Ukrainian pensioners queuing for bread on the separatist side. There was so much misery, just incredible. They created all this chaos and they had no resources, no administration resource, no will, no skills to organize anything, and all the humanitarian aid that was provided, it was looted or just, administrated improperly. All these women, they lost their property, their houses. Look in their eyes. Oh, this was the most free elections on the planet when they elected a president of Donetsk Народная Республика, Donetsk People Republic. The irony is that the passports are Ukrainian because, of course, they were using their kind of historical documents and they had to accept it. So people with Ukrainian passports would vote for a leader of a separatist republic. I will tell you later about this picture. It has a certain significance. So, by Putin's logic, it sounds like this. Yes, everything went wrong in the best scenario. Well, it's okay. We are ready to shed all the blood we have, but the West will not sacrifice those resources that are so precious to eat. In this manner, Putin ruthlessly exploits the West's regard for human life, which he himself does not share because he is not sentimental. In Russia, a particular emotion runs high. This emotion is resentment, a monstrous, endless, bitter resentment. Nothing can satisfy this resentment. Putin and Russian society as a whole are offended by the world order, which looks unfair to them. This resentment is projected on the one who appears to be responsible for this world, the United States. Putin chose resentment as a formula of life. And resentment is a convenient emotion. First of all, you feel yourself right all the time, and secondly, unjustly trampled. Putin now thinks it's great that the current problems with his Russian army have been forcefully revealed prior to some major war against the entire West, which the Russian leadership considers inevitable. Ukraine and Russia both are in trouble, and it would be good if we thought not only about how to help the Ukraine, but also about what can be done for those who remain in Russia. The main emotion in today's Russia is a resentment that is preserved by fear multiplied by hopelessness, and it needs a compensatory answer. Fear is beaten with hope. People need to be given hope, and it is pointless and futile even to accuse the Russians today of supporting a criminal war and to pin a collective guilt on Russia's already exhausted population. It is now politically futile because we are dealing with people who never been given alternative, who are convinced of their own powerlessness and are very scared. And in this situation, Russians should be at least given hope by demonstrating that things can be different, that Russia can be arranged differently. Peace seems elusive, and war is inevitably long-lasting. In this war, both Ukrainians and Russians are fighting each other for their own truth. The Ukrainian truth fights the Russian truth, and both are paradoxically based on the historical weightlessness of absurd dogmas and prejudices. Even if Russia asks for peace now, it cannot get it. Ukraine is already seeking revenge. In addition, for those people in Ukraine, Donbass, and Russia who have lost relatives and friends, any call for peace sounds like a disgrace and betrayal. Peace, if it were to be, would be called unfair by many, but better it be. Peace. I would like to comment on this picture. This is probably one of the most favorite one of all the pictures I've taken from 2014 to 2019. I was on assignment for Wall Street Journal, and I traveled together with my colleague, and we were chasing access to the trenches around Donetsk airport, because at that time, that was November 2014, and that was the most important story, what's happening there. And we couldn't find any cooperative warlord. No one would give a responsibility and give us access, so we were traveling around. This is the highway taking you to the airport of Donetsk. And finally, after spending like 3.5 hours, we given up and we decided to leave, go back to Donetsk. I typically follow one rule. Before you wrap up and leave, I look around and check, first of all, if you haven't forgotten anything. Maybe there is a picture that you didn't notice right away, or maybe you have forgotten some of your possessions. You know, just check it before you leave, because there is no way to come back. And as I was looking around, I have seen something flickering in the air, some strange, sharp, motley movement in the air. So I took my long lens, and I still couldn't figure out. Then I asked my driver to take us closer, and as we were driving and I was still looking into the viewfinder, I kind of, dropped my jaw. I just couldn't believe. I have seen a bicycle hanging in the air. Okay, so I left the car and I walked for about 200 meters. And as I walked, I've heard screaming and swearing. The rebels were waving madly to me. I stopped. I put my hands up just in case, pulled out my press card, showed it. They continued swearing, and then I could hear what they were screaming. They said, "Stop, you idiot, it's booby-trapped." Then we talk, and they explained to me that this bicycle belonged to the guy who was killed by a booby trap. And so they used this bicycle as an improvised sign: no go, no trespassing, the area is heavily mined. So I took like 10 or 15 pictures waiting for the bicycle to kind of rim in appropriate position so that it's horizontal and you can understand that this is a bicycle. And I did not include a piece of the bridge where it's hanging from, because good photograph has to have a zest. It has to have something like an enigma, so that people stop and look into it, like, what is this? For me, this picture captures all absurdity of this terrible war, of the war that was so easy to avoid. These are just rusted bullets and in a helmet of a Ukrainian soldier who was killed. And I don't know what else can I say. It was so easy to avoid all that. Thank you. I'm sure you have some questions.
Susan Lee. Hi, thank you very much for the incredible photographs. So my question is, because of your background, your language skills, and that you're from that area, you obviously have unlimited access. And I would say,
It's not unlimited, but some access, yeah.
yeah, but you certainly have more access than other photographers that are there. Right? Because I've been following some on the internet, and they certainly don't have this kind of imagery. So I guess, can you have any comments on that? How you were able to get these photographs that other people can't?
Well, altogether, I covered 7 armed conflicts, large and small, and the Ukraine was not even the last one. And the way I was trained, because for 28 years I worked for prominent Western media. I never worked for Russian media. The only Russian magazine I was affiliated with was called Russian Reporter, and the head of it, the chief editor, was a guy from Donetsk, and it was a convenient cooperation, like a win-win. But still, so far I worked for agencies like Associated Press, Bloomberg News, Wall Street Journal, Sunday Times. Sunday Times was like my family. They knew me since 1997. And the way they trained me is that you need to do anything possible and impossible to cover every conflict if you are covering conflict from both sides. And apart from covering let's say I covered the Chechnya, first and second one, okay? So we did cover the rebels, the armed resistance, we did cover the Russian army, we did cover the civilians. Period of second Chechen campaign, it has become even more tricky because we also had to cover the pro-Moscow Chechens. And not a lot of people could understand pro-Moscow Chechens. What's that? How is it possible to have pro-Moscow Chechens given the historical memory, given the deportation history, given the first Chechen campaign and all that? So we had to really kind of dive into this and to spend time and to do appropriate networking, because everything in this life is about relationships. You build relationships with people. If you have relationships, you can get anywhere. If you don't, then you don't. So 85% of my work is not taking pictures. 85% of my work is networking. You build contacts, you're chasing the right contacts, you babysit your contacts, you invest in your contacts. And then these contacts give you opportunities. And once given the opportunities, you do your work. So this is how you get access. And to me, getting access was absolutely everything. So I was prepared to spend months in the area for the sake of securing my access. Sometimes it was, well, most of the time actually, because the industry is in crisis. I would tolerate it that let's say Stern magazine put me an assignment in 2015, and they very clearly said, we will pay you only for 10 working days. But 10 days is not enough to come out with a good story. So I arrived 2 weeks ahead. Well, obviously, by then, the reason why they picked me for this assignment was because they knew that I had knowledge of the place and I had contacts, right? So, but anyway, 2 weeks was necessary to prepare for arrival of my reporter. And by the time she arrived, an interview with an important warlord was secured. All our trip was scheduled. So within 1 week, right, we knew what we were doing. That's what the technique is. And that's fine, you know. This is all I can do. I'm not good for anything else. Concerning working, the difference of working on the Ukrainian side or the Russian side or Chechen side and the Russian side, you know, I really believe that if you know how to talk to people and if you know how to present yourself, you need to present yourself in a manner that people feel that they're not your tools, that you do not exploit them, right? That you treat them with respect. You talk to people. You spend time with people. You demonstrate that you're honest and respectful. And then sometimes it's a wasted 6, 7, 18 hours of talk about nothing. But sometimes like 5 minutes talk on the market square can lead you to like incredible opportunities in terms of your work. I remember I spent 21 days in the west of Ukraine chasing access to illegal amber mining sites. That was one of the most interesting stories I covered. It was like an epidemic of amber mining because amber was heavily pressured in China. China was like a prime market. And Chinese were paying thousands, dozens of thousands of dollars for a piece of amber. So it was like madness. And the Western Ukraine was one big amber mine. So I had to find access to one of these mines. I spent 21 days chasing access. And what happened once, I traveled 350 kilometers one way and 350 kilometers to come back to Rivno, only to kiss the door. Because the guy who I was supposed to meet and negotiate changed his mind. He decided that no, he doesn't give me access. So I drove for 700 kilometers with zero access, right? So finally, I did find the mine, I found the right people, I got my pictures, and we agreed with my reporter that she will sell this to the editorial as an idea. It was very complicated negotiation. Of course, finances was involved. So she would secure an assignment for me in Kiev. And then we would come back, and from Kiev we would take a train and go to Rivne. But you know what happened then? We've heard on the radio that there is something like a strike going on around the police department in such and such a village. And that sounds like something unusual. So we traveled to that village, and we have seen a police department basically blocked by a rioting crowd. So Ukrainian amber miners, all illegal amber miners, they blocked police department because they confiscated some of their tools. And we started talking to people. And in 5 minutes, an unknown guy, he said, I'll take it to my site. Such is the irony. On a previous trip, I spent 21 days fighting for the access. And here, like on my second trip, in 5 minutes, we were taken somewhere else. And you know what? The picture desk would take the pictures from the second trip. They found them kind of more colorful.
So who drives the story? Is it you or is it the reporter who determines what you're doing?
Both, because a good photographer is not just a monkey who can push the button, you know. I have to be my own producer, I have to be my own psychiatrist, I have to be my own bodyguard, my own driver, you know, Figaro. Multifunctional regime, multi-tool. That's how it is. But, you know, of course, it's possible that you just given an assignment and you just follow it like Sunday Times magazine put me on assignment to cover Mariinsky Ballet in St. Petersburg, and that was great, very straightforward. Just do the ballet backstage, you know. And then a reporter who had access and who negotiated about the access, she just tells me what to do.
First an observation, then a question. Last night I happened to watch Night and Fog, which is one of the most important Holocaust films. And I've watched a lot of Holocaust films, documentaries, and the depiction of the atrocities, it's the same picture over and over again. Because one of the things the Nazis did was forbade any journalists, any photographers from taking any photographs. From the famous journalists to the privates, no one can take pictures. What you're doing is such a gift to humanity and bringing us understanding of what's happening. And it was not the case during World War II. What you're doing is so incredibly important and brave.
Thank you.
My question is, on a very practical level, which interests me, when you go into a destroyed town, when you're in the midst of fighting, where do you sleep? Where do you eat? Where do you find your food? How often do you get home? What are the practical aspects of being where you are and doing what you do when you have your own self to take care of? How do you do it?
Thank you for the question. I've been asked about it, and I'd like to make a point that a photojournalist is not a James Bond who travels alone, who knows without GPS how to drive around Azerbaijan or China or Mexico or Italy. And he doesn't need translators, and he doesn't need guides, and he doesn't need bodyguards, of course. And we photographers, unfortunately, we all do need this. It's incredibly dangerous, and it's incredibly unpredictable, and it's expensive. I remember that in Syria, my working day would start from $500 to $1,500 a day, right? Because you have to pay for a lot of shit. You know, apart from the hotel, you have to pay to your bodyguard, you have to pay to your translator, and they charge more and more and more depending on situation, how the warm-up map changes, basically. In the Donbass, it wasn't that bad. It was typically like from $200 to $600 a day. So, and you invest your own money, and then you're getting reimbursed if you're asking about financial side. And obviously, the editorial who hires you, they need to make sure that you are the right person, right? That it's not going to be a financial fiasco. And as you pre-plan, you need to think really, really well. Where are you traveling? Who are you traveling with? Is it worth traveling this direction? Because I've made my mistakes. I remember how once I insisted that we travel to such and such a village on such and such an agenda, and it was a wasted trip. There was no result, no goal has been achieved, and we have almost been killed in result of a mortar attack as we were driving on such and such a highway. And my driver, and I admit it and I apologize later, was against taking this highway on such and such a time. So fortunately we both survived. So always, before you go, think twice. Is it worth going there? What's the goal? What's the purpose? Once you are there, will you be able to do your work? Because once you're there, you need to do your work, right? And you do it properly, because there is no way to rephotograph, right? Don't leave before you're absolutely convinced that you're done. So that is important. The other thing is that, ironically, war is such a crazy place that you can wake up in a 5-star hotel in the morning and have a nice espresso or cappuccino, and you can have anything you want if you have money in this hotel, right? I used to sleep in Palace and Marriott. There's no limit. But then you spend the night in a ditch with some guys, with some Rouge guys, some Cossacks or some separatists or some Ukrainian guys, some Ukrainian, infantry people. And it's all part of the landscape. And this is why I love this work. Because after you arrive back to some hotel where you can have a hot shower and you can have a glass of wine and then you sifting through your pictures, and I mean, my wife never understood it, never. Such romantics is not for her.
I have a question right here.
But I can tell you quite an idiotic story how me and my friend, driver and the fixer, also Dmitri, we survived on 2 sausages for 3 days. Like 2 sticks of, this kind of dry sausage. Salami, yeah. 3 sticks of salami, 3 days, 2 or 3. And no water, so we had to take snow, Then the other crazy story was December of 1999, when I had the privilege to be on assignment together with most outstanding war reporter who worked for the Sunday Times. Her name was Marie Colvin, and she was American, and she tragically died February of 2012 in Homs, Syria, when she came under mortar attack. And I worked with her in December 1999 in Chechnya, and at that time she had both eyes, because she lost an eye in Sri Lanka when she covered the Tamil Tigers, and since then she traveled using an eye patch, and that became her kind of insignia. It was brave and very professional woman, and I learned a lot from her. And as we traveled, we spent 25 days in rebel-controlled area of Chechnya, and it was absolutely crazy. It was Ramadan. The entire area was not controlled by Russians at that time, and the warlord gave us access, basically believing that they needed journalists to tell the story, right? So he would look after us. And through the time we spent in Chechnya, the Russian airborne troops, they cut the only highway leading to Georgia, because we were smuggled from Georgia to Chechnya, right? And then once we spent 25 days in the area, the only artery was cut. So we had to take a roundabout detour. And we walked for 8 days without having any alpinistic equipment, no proper clothes, and no food. So what we were doing, we were looting abandoned shepherd houses, because the area we walked through is called Northern Tushetia, Severная Tushetia, and this is a place where Georgian shepherds are grazing their cattle. So from May down to September, you can see people there. From September down to next May, it's a no-man's land. So all we could see, rocks and snow and ice. So we survived on snow. We survived on, Marie found in one abandoned shepherd house, ice, like frozen onion, piece of onion. Then she found a very, very frozen flower. So we took a stone, we took an old bucket with a hole at the bottom, kind of created an angle, made a bonfire. So we melted this flour and mixed it with this frozen onion and with the snow. It tasted just terribly disgusting. But, she told me, Beliakov, you're not here to eat. Now shut up and eat. Vitamins. These are vitamins. So on the 8th day, we were picked up by the Georgian Marines, and I just couldn't believe it. I thought I was hallucinating. So that was culinary tour, quite a culinary tour.
Hi. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I believe that photojournalists are the ones that really build public will to force policy.
If you could speak louder, please, because I was shell-shocked 4 times.
I said, I believe that picture's worth 1,000 words, and that one of the things that you do and photojournalists do is build to push policy in either direction. What I'm wondering is, do you ever feel that you've been trapped? Because the higher the level of visibility you get for your photos, when you can't cover both sides, or are you covering both sides? And do you ever feel that if you go to one side, you're going to be a target because you've built public will on another side?
Well, I was targeted like countless number of times, and there was everything. I mean, there was extrajudicial execution threat, and I've been in a situation when a bunch of drunken separatists in Slavyansk, they detained me and my colleague and our fixer, and they made threats like we should whack 1 or 2 journalists right now so that the journalists stop dicking around here, you know, stuff like that. And we have managed to talk ourselves out of this. And in Chechnya, I remember one of the Saudi mercenaries, he made a very clear threat that he will behead me. He did not like the fact that he had Russian here. That was when I was on assignment with Marie, and she had to interfere. So often journalists targeted just because they're in the wrong place and at the wrong time, and it's a lottery, and this is part of the landscape. But you do what you do, you know, and you obviously. I'm not a suicider, and I always wanted to be careful, and still it's still a mystery to me how did I manage to be in one piece after covering 7 conflicts. But you know, it's a gambling. It's a huge lottery. Some of my colleagues ended up in grave. Some of my colleagues are in prison for opposing war. I have chosen not to come back. I have chosen to escape for the sake of my family, and people here in the US treat us very, very kindly. Generosity and kindness. And if I have not deserved it, because my wife insists I'm an asshole, but I really believe that my family deserved it. This is all I can say.
What are you photographing now?
My family.
When you were in the Donbass, and you and your reporter were talking to separatists, was there any consistent message that you thought they were trying to get out through you, other than the Ukrainians were Nazis?
Well, there were many messages that were trying to translate, to send. Message number 1 is that the Ukrainian government, which is the government of Nazis, you know, that was the idea, and that we are here to defend the Ukraine from NATO, which is looming, blah, blah, blah. So they've had their own messages. Not necessarily those messages were true, but they were trying to use us as a loudspeaker, right? On the Ukrainian side, the message was different. Russia has invaded, Crimea has been annexed, then a turmoil was created artificially on the land of the Donbass, and on and on and on. So we perfectly well realized that Putin didn't care about the Donbass. That's why for 8.5 years he would not bother of integrating the Donbass into territory of Russia, right? Because for him it was far more important to hold this kind of a boiling condition in this territory. All the chaos, all the turmoil, all the bloodshed, he was interested in this, because this is how he could control this phase of chaos, controllable chaos, right? You've heard of this. And we could see that, and sometimes if our opponent was more or less adequate, we could speak to him like as a human, like civilized people, right? We were trying to kind of reassure them, but we never win, never. It was all pointless, unfortunately, because such is an effect of propaganda. I really think that propaganda is the most dangerous weapon of our time.
when I was given birth to my second child, Putin was invading Ukraine. I was basically there, and anesthesiologist brought me printout, like, hey, that's what's happening in your country. And my whole family, my old colleagues, many of them are journalists, were there. And then just recently, right now, I'm living in Vermont, and the founder of very, very beloved ice cream brand, Ben & Jerry, decided to support quite generously some kind of organization that is talking about peace talk, because this is horrible. Like, we saw just like one glimpse, and it was pretty terrible to see the pictures. And all these nice Vermonters and Americans said, why not to stop it? You need to negotiate and stop this horror. And my husband's American husband, he's like, yeah, you need to start negotiations. And I was speechless. I could not explain to him how he could understand that negotiations with Russia, with Putin's Russia, is not possible.
There should be no negotiations with
Help
Putin.
me, because I feel like you would have very simple and clear arguments.
There should be no negotiations with Putin. He's not the man to negotiate. Putin only understands a language of force. This is the only language he would tolerate and understand and comprehend. There should be no negotiations with Putin. It's over. He lost his chance. I really am against any negotiations with Putin. He can only be defeated. Period.
So what about these nice liberals who are saying you need to have peace back?
Look, peace is a very expensive phenomenon. You cannot have peace without suffering and without losing something. You just cannot. Peace is a very expensive phenomenon.
Question here.
This past weekend with the Wagner Group, it looked like a major world event. Your opinion of what happened last week and where do you think everything goes from here?
Oh, you're talking about the Wagner coup?
Yes.
I can't call them friends anymore because they're fighting as the soldiers of Wagner. But I mean, I knew these people half of my life probably. And I haven't heard from them since that time. But one of them told me very clearly that he joined Wagner and he's fighting in the Ukraine. And I knew from the very beginning that he would be a very, very mean threat to the Ukrainians because he is a professional special forces soldier. And yes, indeed, Wagner private military company is one of the most well-trained and well-organized unit. But what happened last week, so far I can't have any explanation for myself because I was prepared that, they're going to take Moscow. And I was prepared to see real chaos and real bloodshed. And I still believe that we haven't been told everything because Lukashenko and Putin are not naive and they are not people you can trust from what they tell you on the TV. I really think that they made an offer that Prigozhin couldn't refuse. That's what I really think. And just the fact that I have taken Rostov and Voronezh so easily, and they stopped basically just a couple of 100 kilometers from Moscow. And why would they stop? Because if you can continue and if you're good to go, why would you cancel? Their ambitions are very, very high, and I know that Prigozhin is not sentimental. So far, I got no explanation. But one thing I'm sure about is that Prigozhin will end up really, really badly. People like him end up ugly, and no one's gonna care. No one's gonna cry for him.
I wanted to follow up on that question. the Western newspapers are saying that Putin was destabilized by this. Do you think that Putin has been destabilized by what happened? Or do you think he's in a firm grip on Russia still?
No. There is no firm grip. I am actually convinced that Putin does understand that he made a grave mistake February of 2022. He's not stupid, he cannot but understand that invading the Ukraine was a grave mistake. And I am absolutely convinced that he is looking for some way out. He is looking for a chance to begin peaceful negotiations which he could sell later to his own nation that, hey, this is our victory. Maybe he's hoping that they will kind of freeze the conflict for some time. Maybe he's hoping that he will sell the idea to Ukraine under like peace in exchange for territories. So the territories we have taken, we keep, and you keep the rest. And if you're not happy with that, we will continue to kill each other. But the thing is that he doesn't really understand how dedicated Ukrainians are, because I am in a daily contact with my Ukrainian friends. I have no access to Ukraine anymore, and I will tell you about it later. But these Ukrainian soldiers and officers who are in contact with me, they tell me that we do not care about this kind of paradigm as peace in exchange for territories, because we do not trade Ukrainian soil, right? We will continue to fight for as long as it is necessary. I asked one of my friends once again, so what do you think about the danger of regional nuclear conflict? What if Putin uses a nuclear, so-called тактический ядерный заряд, tactical nuclear charge, which I really believe that it could have been already delivered to the occupied territory. And his answer was, we don't give a shit in which manner they kill us. Because if they kill us anyway. So they stop being sentimental too. I mean, it may sound selfish. Yes, it is selfish, because if there is a regional nuclear conflict, it's not going to be good for the entire Europe, right? And it will be bad also for Russia, of course. It will be a complete disaster. But let me tell you something. Ukrainians will not negotiate, right? They just want victory. They want to bring back all the occupied territories under Ukrainian control, and they will want compensation. And Putin has to leave. He has to go. As simple as that. So what I'm saying is that at some point, there are speculations like in July there will be negotiations somewhere in Brussels or somewhere in Beijing or who knows where. There will be no negotiations. There can be a meeting, right? High-ranking meeting. But how many meetings we've had already? But I'm absolutely convinced that Zelensky is not the kind of guy who would make a deal on a formula like peace in exchange for territories. Get out of my country and bring me back everything and pay me a sensible compensation for all the people, for all the human lives, you know, then we may continue. But I think that Putin is not the guy who should be even, you know, involved in this process.
Okay, we've actually run out of time, so I want to just thank you very much for being here with us, and I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. So,
It's because my answers probably are too long.